Well, welcome everybody. It's very good to have you here, and welcome to England. I'm sure you have been welcomed already, but welcome in particular to Tickencote. I thought what I would do is give you a little bit of a sort of thumbnail plotted history of this particular village, how it came to be here, and the church, and a little bit of the history of the church, and then tell you about the circumstances we're in at the moment, because I think Steve has probably given you an idea that the sort of the future of the church as a parish church is very much under threat. So I've done a little bit of homework, so I hope you'll bear with me, and I'll tell you what the situation is here really. We are a very small parish. We're less than 60 people in this parish, which gives you an idea really in a sense of how rural communities, small rural communities, have actually diminished, because there was a time, of course, they've been diminishing for about 200 years. There was a time when these rural communities really had quite a lot of people in them to meet the needs of agriculture and the land. But of course we go back a lot further than just 200 years. This village has a Saxon name, but the area was actually well settled in Roman times. The Roman centre was at Great Castleton, which is just about a mile along the valley. And Caster was a Roman place name, with the Saxon ending Tom being added later. And Casterton as a Roman centre, roads fanned out from there, linking back to Ermine Street, which was a principal north-south street, the principal arterial route that the Romans used within England. And one of these other roads sort of radiated out, and one of the minor roads passed through Oakham to Empingham and through to here. And the valley bottom down here was actually heavily modified, and it was used in Roman times, and the mill, which is still in the village, is reputed to be on Roman footings, Roman foundations, although that's still to be verified. And there was a Roman villa on the south side of the valley, the other side of the valley, because they wanted the warmer on the sort of northern slopes, which would then be facing south. They wanted the warmer slopes for their crops under agricultural use. Well, the Saxons, when they actually occupied these Roman sites, they generally didn't use the Roman buildings. They didn't occupy the Roman buildings. And in fact, they settled on this northern side of the valley. And the name Ticken, Ticcen, refers to goats, and cote is an enclosure. So Tickencote was the place where goats and their offspring, the kids, were kept away from the woodland, and there was a lot of woodland in this area which had developed after the collapse of the Roman agricultural system. And here there was a large and prosperous settlement and a well-to-do manor. However, it was in a very awkward place when it came to history as that unfolded, because we were adjacent to the Great North Road just up here, when the Black Death arrived, the population of this village was absolutely decimated. As many as half of the properties were abandoned, and the village shrunk to half its medieval size. And on this far side of the village, behind these houses here, you will see that there are visible remains in the fields of farms and either a windmill or a dovecote from the shape of the ground. Well, on this particular site, where the church is now, there was a Saxon church on this site, although there is little sign of that remaining, except for some stonework in the vestry wall, which is just in here, and over the door. Now, the original entry to the building was actually on the north side, on this side, but it's been moved over to this side subsequently. Well, the Norman church, this was when the Saxon church was substantially rebuilt. And it seems to have followed the original Saxon plan of the Norman church, but it was extended and enlarged, and the structure seems to have very much been a statement of the power and influence of the new owners that took over this particular settlement. And certainly it can be seen from the magnificence of this building that the holder of this land either had money or connections. And the chancel arch here is really incredibly unique, really, in the country, because this is a Norman arch. This was actually rebuilt in 1792 when the church was rebuilt, but it is substantially in its original form. And it dated from around 1130 to 1150. So it's getting on for 900 years old. And it could be as early as 1110. There are a couple of other churches near Oxford, Oxford and Gloucester, which have a similar chancel arch in them, but certainly this would have been the first one. And it seems likely that the architect for this came from Normandy or had been trained there, because there are very unique features that predate any other features that we find in England at this particular time. For example, the 6-part vaulted roof. This vaulted roof, I encourage you afterwards to have a look at this one. This 6-part vaulted roof is absolutely unique, with the Norman boss in the middle of it, and that is all original stonework in there, although it's probably been reconstructed in 1790. And of course the roof bosses as well here are again the original. When they rebuilt the building, they actually reused these bosses on the roof in the main part of the chancel here. The font, this font here, which we use for baptisms, I guess you know, is dated only about 70 or 80 years after the arch, which is remarkable. So this is, 800 plus years old, the top of this font. And the top, this is the original piece, this is the original top, and this was a subsequent section that was added in later, because in fact it actually stood, you always had the fonts, don't know if you know this, you probably do, but fonts were always by the door as you came in, because they symbolised the entry into faith. Baptism was the entry into faith. So you often see fonts in the most awkward place they possibly can be, by the door as you come into the church. And so they would have been on this side, and then of course when the church was reconfigured, they were moved over to this particular, it was moved over to this particular side. Now, this main area of rebuilding was carried out in 1791, as you have heard, by Eliza Wingfield, and it really was using her masons. I mean, it was a magnificent job. I was a practicing architect before I went into the church full time, and I can honestly say that it's been extremely well built, and that is actually to our advantage now from what we face. There are a number of other features within which I'd encourage you to just have a look at when you're going to have a wander around. For example, the slab of Purbeck marble, which is actually behind the altar, is the original altar top at Norman times. So that again is 900 years old. And the tomb in here, that was a monument in the south wall of the chancel to Sir Roland Le Denis, who was knighted in the French wars in 1355. And this is probably a tomb cover, and there are only 9 of these timber ones like that actually in the country. So you can see that special features here, which makes this church absolutely unique. I mean, you can say that any parish church in this country is completely unique because it embodies the traditions of that particular area, that particular place. But this particular place has got so many interesting things happening. And of course, the benefit that the church has received from the Wingfield family over the last 400 years has been fantastic. So her masons, Eliza Wingfield's masons, comprehensively reconstructed the church. They used some modifications, and as I say, the porch on this particular side, there was a chantry chapel which was taken down, and some new arcading on this back end here. but most of the stonework in this East End is actually original. So that gives you an idea of that. Just one other little thing which we sort of dug out of the Saviour for you, and that is our chalice. I think this is very beautiful. I think I've got a particular thing about the silver that we have inherited in our churches. This is 17th century, this chalice and pattern. And what is absolutely beautiful about it, I mean, you can see the shape of it. They were very tall and narrow at this particular time. And the chalice and pattern, it looks like this is a lid. And it is actually a lid because it's got an edge round it, and the lid fits beautifully on the top of the chalice. However, when you administer Holy Communion with the wine and the bread, this actually becomes the pattern, the lid becomes the pattern. So the pattern then sits in there with the bread on the top during the administration of Holy Communion. This is a real treasure. This is a real treasure. And on the bottom, it does tell us that it was given by John Wingfield and Mr. Garrett and Mrs. Garrett, his wife. And as far as we can see, it is something like 16, it is definitely 16, I think it's 1608. Wonderful, isn't it? Just a wonderful. So, it's very beautiful. Very precious. Very precious. I'll just put it up here so it's out of harm's way. Now, the situation at the moment is that we have this precious jewel of a church here, but unfortunately our congregation is very limited because we've only got a population of something like 60. We do get over 30 to our harvest festivals and our carol services, but we simply don't have the population now to support a church like this because, of course, it costs a lot of money to keep a building like this in good repair and what have you. We also haven't had church officers, lay church officers. I mean, I'm actually standing in, although I'm retired, I'm actually standing in looking after 4 villages at the moment, of which this is one. And the largest village is at Great Castleton. We have another one at Little Castleton, Pickworth, and here at Tickencote. Our churches in very small villages are under threat at this particular time, and we've come to something of a crisis point here at Tickencote because we don't have any church officers. And so we're not able actually to keep this going as a parish church. The Anglican Church is very strong with regard to the support it wants to give people pastorally in our communities. And so this parish, if we were to close the church, would become part of Great Castleton Parish. So it would become Great Castleton with Tickencote. However, the building is causing concern at the moment, and we're working with Peterborough Diocese, within whose jurisdiction we operate, to decide on the future of the church. Now, we can't keep it going as a parish church. There are a number of options as to what we can actually do. The first ideal option would be for the church's conservation trust to take over the building. They would take it over and look after it. They have endowments of cash, and they are able to support the maintenance and the ongoing maintenance in perpetuity for this church. However, because their resources are limited, they will only choose the very best churches that are coming available. As you can imagine, they want to keep the jewels intact. They will ensure that the church is still open to the public on a regular basis, and we also would be able to use this for six services a year, which is not many more than we already have, because we only have one service a month, mainly during the summer here. So that would be an ideal solution. That really would be an ideal solution. However, we know that if they were their choices are limited, and we have a number of churches that are coming up to be made redundant, as it were, which is a dreadful term, isn't it? Failing that, if it was not taken over by the CCT, there is the option that we could find another trust. If there was a local trust, we're not aware of any local trusts, but if a local trust which had sufficient endowment within it, sufficient capital reserves in it to support the maintenance of a church like this, then it would be possible and the diocese would agree to that actually happening, it being given over to a charitable trust on that basis. That would be a second option. The third option would be for this to no longer be the parish church, but to become what they call a chapel of ease. Now, a chapel of ease is still within the jurisdiction of the parish. It would now be the joint parish, Great Casterton and Tickencote, and this would be like a second church within that. We could still use it as much as we wanted to. We couldn't do the normal things that you do in a parish church, so we couldn't have weddings in it, because you can only be married in parish churches. But we could use it in much the same way as we do now for the benefit of the local community. However, the responsibility for the ongoing maintenance would lie with the new parish, which would be Great Casterton. And Great Casterton only has a population of just under 1,000 people. So, and we have a precious medieval church ourselves that we have to look after, which we struggle to look after there. And we have a good congregation there, so we have a congregation of sort of 50 or 60, and we have nearly 100 people on our electoral roll. So we can support one church. We did discuss this 5 years ago as to whether we should take on another church, and it was rejected as an idea. But I think failing every other alternative, I think it would be given serious consideration again. But it does mean taking on a substantial liability, and our resources are limited to support that. The next option almost doesn't bear thinking about, but it has happened on numerous occasions throughout the country, and that would be to sell the church. Which, and if you're going to sell a property like this, if on your travels around the country, you might see it from time to time, but churches are turned into houses. People live in them and things of this nature. However, you don't live in one, do you?
Well, like Simon and I went up to Scotland last week, and we drove past an old church that had been turned into a petrol station.
Yeah, and into a petrol station. Yeah. I haven't heard that one before, but that's unbelievable, isn't it? So, I mean, sometimes small chapels can lend themselves quite nicely to that, but I mean, it just doesn't really bear the imagination that this should be like that. I think this, with the kind of jewels that we have here, we want to see this maintained in perpetuity as it is and as a place of worship. So that's where we are. Sorry to be the bearer of that kind of news, and particularly as you're all Wingfields, and you've all, your family and John's family have particularly looked after this property for the last sort of 400 years, of which the local community are very grateful. So thank you very much. If I can answer any questions, I will, but my historical depth doesn't go too far, but maybe John's one. Yes?
When will the decision be made on this first choice?
On this first choice.
Right.
Well, we have made an informal approach to the CCT. We also know that the church commissioners are interested in this because of its its ancient origins. If the church commissioners, who the CCT are under the control of the church commissioners, if the church commissioners said, we think this is so important that you've got to take it over, the CCT won't carry out any evaluation, they'll just take it over. So if you know anybody in the church commissioners, no, I can't say anything. But that would be a good option. However, we are in an informal process at the moment until we know whether the CCT are going to take it over or not. Because if they say they would take it over, then we would go into that formal process and say, please, let's move it forward with the diocese. If not, then we start to click into start looking at these other options.
And so the Reverend?
How much does it take to maintain this?
Well, how long is a piece of string, really? I mean, as I was an architect, I mean, these buildings with historic materials are very expensive to maintain, very expensive. I mean, stonework, a small amount of stonework can cost thousands. However, we do have a system where we have quinquennial inspections. Every 5 years, these churches are inspected in detail, and we come up with a range of repairs that are necessary to keep them in good condition, so they don't fall into progressive decay. A building like that, when this was rebuilt in 1790, it was rebuilt extremely well, and it's got lots of details which are efficient in terms of maintenance. However, I suppose you would be talking about, if you sort of smoothed it out over time, you now and again you get a serious piece of work like doing some re-roofing and things of this nature. It's very difficult to put a figure on, but if you were to, I would think, if you were to think in terms of for a parish church, around about 10,000 a year. Do you see what I mean? I think you may not spend any of that for 9 years, and then you've got a bill for 90,000 quid, you know. I mean, that sort of thing happens. I think if you think in those kinds of terms, that's the sort of money we're talking about.
And also, you have mentioned we have to pay to the church, don't we, the parish?
Yes, that is, the parish share is about actually keeping a priest. I mean, it costs about £67,000. I'm cheap, but it costs about £67,000 to fund a priest. What's that? $80,000? Something like that, $85,000. So each parish that the priest supports provides a share, as it were, of that. The share here is only £700 a year at the moment, but in our joint benefice it's 24,000. 24,000 is the requirement at the present time, because we have a part-time priest.
I was going to mention this is a hatchment.
Yes.
Which was always put outside the main house of Tickencote, and anybody of importance died. And you could see the wings on the left, and that was the Johnson, wasn't it? And we had that restored. We took it up to New York to Nottingham in the rain, in a tiny car bouncing on the top. And it was in a terrible state before, but we've had it restored. But you can see there's obviously, because this room the church gets very cold and damp. You can see there is some damp forming already. Yes. But if you go around churches, and you'll see that all the important families had hatchment after one of the Wingfields had died, and then they gave it to the church.
And that's
Hatchment. Hatchment. And all these are Wingfield windows, Victorian ones. That's wonderful.
And when you walk around, you'll see the windows here, and they'll even have some individual names in the window, and so forth. So definitely make sure you catch that when you go around.
This is a Lancelot, Harry Lancelot Lee of Coton. That's a shop where we build marriage.
Can someone translate the motto?
Can anybody translate the motto? Something noble.
Well, John will do it for you.
Okay.
My translation is posse, to be able, knowledge, to refuse to do it, and is a noble thing. In other words, to restrain from power is a noble thing.
Very nice.
And I'll pass this Tickencote book, and this is to show you the sign of the church when it was in 1731, which was drawn by Stukely, who was an architect. Yeah, we'll show you the drawing here.
You're stay back here with the John Wingfield. Back here has a number of names here in the back, so you can see that. And over here, John Maurice Wingfield, he's there as well. So make sure you get a copy of that. John, do you have a comment?
That's Harriet Wingfield.
Harriet?
That's the one that is in your,
The book, the Harriet Lee? Yeah, so for those that attended the annual meeting, a booklet was given to the attendees that showed the Wingfield and Lee family connection. And I think in the Wingfield stores, we have some extra copies and so forth. So if you didn't attend the meeting, you can get a booklet there. It's very beautiful. This version of the booklet compared to the previous one that was done over a decade ago, I believe. It has some cover photos in there of some portraits of the Lee family, a couple of the Wingfield family members. It's a beautiful book. So I definitely encourage you. And I might have one in my suitcase, so during the dinners or so forth, I can share that with you as well. Darlene, you have a comment?
I have a question. What is the right-hand side there?
I think they said Johnson.
Johnson.
Yeah, so
And that's pre-renovation bell there. And then this one, the problem here with Father Fountain is Memorial Fountain. Yeah. And the Wingfields, right in the problem field.
And I'll just say a quick comment here. In the booklet that I have, it looks like you have even a different one, but has a lot of similar information in it, and I'll be getting copies made of this if there's none available here today. But it has mentioned here about the Lord of the Manor. I'll just briefly make a few comments here because you're probably maybe wondering when it came over to the Wingfield family. But the family of and correct me if I mispronounce something, the family of the Ladanes held the lordship until the middle of the 15th century when it passed through marriage to the Dales. It then passed to the Greshams, and then at the beginning of the 17th century to John Wingfield, and has remained with the Wingfield until recently. And so John Wingfield, who was the second son of Robert Wingfield of Upton and Elizabeth Cecil, which we just came from the Tinwell Church, All Saints Church. Their son married the heiress of the Paul Gresham, Elizabeth Gresham, and as a result, the manor came into the Wingfield family. From there, have lived here ever since. And for many of you that are here in this room, you are a descendant of John Wingfield and Elizabeth Gresham. Okay, my apologies. He did have a second marriage. I think it was Margaret Thorball. Okay. And so some of you might even come from that, because both of those marriages had children, quite a few children, to be honest. And the packets that I provided you has the Wingfield pedigree, and there's a pretty nice chart in there that actually shows the Wingfield to Tickencote, and you can kind of see how that tree goes and so forth. Because, like I said, the majority of you that are in here are descended from Thomas Wingfield of York River, who was a son of John Wingfield, the York Herald. And so he was a younger son of the heir of the Tickencote branch. And so maybe this will be an appropriate time before we take time to walk around and ask further questions. May I ask John and Sue to come up? I have a little gift here that I want to hand over to you. And you're welcome to come over as well. There's two gifts here, but I feel it's probably more appropriate to hand to the church. So this little bag here is for you that has the name of Wingfield. We handed them out at the annual meeting and so forth. So that gift's yours. But inside here, which I won't pull out, there's an envelope here for a donation for you to put towards the church for in the time being with possible repairs and so forth of the church. It's our intention that we're going to be talking more about this in the newsletters and try to help solicit further donations of the church and so forth. But this is a donation from the Wingfield Family Society to start that initiative.
That's very kind. Thank
And
you
so,
very much, everybody. We do
I will leave it up
appreciate
to
it.
you, to give it to you,
Yeah.
then to pass on to the church and that.
That's
So,
very generous of you. Thank you very much, everybody.
but it's in an envelope in here, and I'll just hand this over to you.
Yeah, that's
Thank
very
you
kind.
very much. That's
Thank you very
kind.
much.
Thank you.
We can do that here, or I thought maybe during lunch.
Yes, during lunch.
Yeah, so during lunch, just so you guys can start thinking about what your bids are going to be. This is a Wingfield gin. I think we had one at the annual meeting that was up for auction and that, and so we want to auction this off during lunch to the highest bidder. And my assumption is the funds from the auction will go towards the church and so forth. And
And it's
so,
World Gin Day today by chance.
and so I would assume we probably have some gin people here that might be interested in this. These are hard to come by. Jim Novak, for the one that we had for the annual meeting, he searched high and low to find this Wingfield gin, and fortunately was able to get just a couple bottles. And I think some of you here even looked into a local liquor store in London or so forth and couldn't find it there as well.
You can get it only, you can only get it Harvey Nichols, which is the shop like Harrods, expensive. Yeah, it's not, it's beside, just down the road from Harrods. Harvey Nichols is, an expensive department store.
So it's my hope during lunch we can auction this off and pull together some funds to further contribute to the church. So I'll make sure to bring this to the our lunch, which will be at the Barnsdale Lodge, and we'll have it the auction at that point in
Thank
time.
you very much.
Is there anything further you'd like to add before giving the people opportunity to?
I don't think so, no.
Okay.
And may look in the
Yes,
vestry.
please do. We'll look at it.
And probably just other comments to mention, and I'll shut up. As you see a variety of memorials here of various Wingfield cousins, in some cases direct ancestors and so forth. You may be asking your questions, where are the rest of them, of the Tickencote branch, because it's been in the family hands for centuries. You probably saw some tombs as you were walking in here along the side. Hugh Hayes, also Tickencote descendant. He passed away how many years ago?
About
2 years.
About 2 years ago. I wanted to bring up his name because he had come to the annual meetings from England many years and so forth. I unfortunately didn't have the pleasure to meet him, but he is, from my understanding, was a remarkable gentleman, very friendly. He would bring different type of Wingfield things to the annual meetings and so forth. Very good friends with Vance and Tommy. Unfortunately, I didn't have the pleasure to meet him, but later on, as we're going back to the bus, over in the corner there, you'll see his tombstone. I would definitely encourage you to take a photo of that, because he was a special person, as well as John Perry Wingfield is, but he's here with us and hopefully for many more years. But I did want to point him out specifically, because
his second wife should have been here today, but she hasn't come.
Okay. And I had the pleasure of meeting her when I came to your house that one day, and we hope to see her in a future annual meeting, or for those that are visiting in the future. So I think that's all I wanted to say. And so definitely enjoy walking around inside the church, outside of the church, and I'll confirm what our lunch time is, but I think we initially had intended to be here for an hour, and so I don't know what the time is at the moment, but, okay. But definitely enjoy, because I know you want to take some pictures. I did forget something, sorry. Back to the point of, you're kind of maybe wondering where the rest of the Wingfields are and so forth. There was a survey that was done not too long ago of the area, and had some challenges for that, but haven't found all the graves of other descendants and so forth. But what we do have, and I have copies of it, is the parish registers have now become public in some domains, some of the older ones, and so I have copies of that. Don't have them all, but it has burial notices of various Wingfields, the Tickencote branch, and that I'll be sharing that with you guys as well. But I don't have John Wingfield and Elizabeth Grissom and so forth, but we're continually trying to hunt for that, but you can be assured they are buried somewhere on the proper ground, and I would assume, given their status, somewhere within here, around this general area, given their status.
And also there's a list of all the vicars going back to 1300 outside, which was quite interesting, including some Wingfields there. Yeah, just on the vestry there.
Yep. And Lucy, your ancestor in Tickencote branch, was it John Wingfield?
Yes.
And he was a rector?
Reverend Samuel Hunt was rector here.
Okay.
He married Sarah Wingfield. He eloped with Sarah Wingfield, who was only 17, a year after her father died. I don't think her parents didn't feel that Samuel Hunt was quite a suitable match, but which is why Samuel Hunt helped Sarah out of the drawing room window at Market Overton Rectory and escaped to Gretna Green. But they came back and were probably married in Market Overton. But Samuel Hunt's on the list of rectors, and some other Hunts, who I believe are related.
And they were happily married for 40 years, weren't they?
40 years, yes, she lived.
And we've got a copy of this original Gretna Green marriage certificate.
Well, thank you very much
Well, thank you all for coming. Thank you
for
very
being
much.
here, and you'll be joining us for lunch as our guest.
Thank you.
Yes. Will you be able to join us too?
I've got to go over to Ely.
Okay.
This afternoon.
Okay.
That's all right. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah. And John Perry Wingfield and Jocelyn and I are working with the Reverend for the process, as he had talked about, to hopefully save the church and so forth. And so we'll be keeping people informed of how that progress is going in that. But thank you very much for giving us access here today. And we'll now spend time. We'd definitely probably like to get a photo with maybe just the three of you first, if that's okay. And then if I can get